The morning of February 20th, 1944, 32,000 feet above Brandenburg, Germany. Captain Don Blakeslee is leading 48 P-51 Mustangs through air so cold it burns to breathe, watching 500 B-17 flying fortresses form their combat boxes below him. Standard doctrine. High escort. Stay with the bombers. Protect the formation. But 3 miles beneath his flight, something is wrong. The bomber stream is spreading out, losing its defensive cohesion, and climbing toward them from the east, just visible as black specks against winter clouds, are 60 Focke-Wulf 190s flying in a formation the Americans have never seen before. Heavily armored, 30mm cannons, moving with the deliberate patience of sharks approaching wounded prey. Blakeslee has 2 choices: follow orders, maintain altitude, and watch those bomber killers tear through the formation, or break every regulation in the 8th Air Force Tactical Manual. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. He chooses to dive. October 1943, 6 weeks earlier. The crisis that will reshape American fighter doctrine is reaching its catastrophic conclusion over Schweinfurt. The 8th Air Force dispatches 291 B-17 seconds to destroy ball-bearing production facilities deep in Germany. The plan depends on one assumption. Heavily armed bombers flying in tight defensive formations can protect themselves without fighter escort beyond a certain range. The P-47 Thunderbolts and P-38 Lightnings turn back at the German border. Their fuel tanks empty, their range exhausted. The bombers continue alone. What happens next destroys that assumption forever. German fighters swarm the formations from every angle. Head-on attacks, diving passes, coordinated assault from multiple altitudes. When the bombers finally limp back to England, 60 aircraft are missing. 600 men, some parachuted into captivity. Most never made it out of their aircraft. The loss rate is 20.6%. Unsustainable. Mathematically impossible to maintain. General Hap Arnold receives the casualty reports at his desk in Washington. He writes in his daily log, direct quote, "We have lost air superiority. Deep penetration missions are suspended until further notice." End quote. For 3 months, the strategic bombing campaign against Germany effectively ceases. Not because of weather, not because of equipment shortages, because American fighters cannot protect bombers beyond 400 miles from England. The problem is physics. The P-47 Thunderbolt, backbone of the 8th Air Force Fighter Escort, carries an internal fuel capacity of 305 gallons. Maximum combat radius, 320 miles. Add a pair of 75-gallon drop tanks and you gain another 80 miles. Still not enough to reach Berlin. Munich, the industrial heartland of the Reich. The P-38 Lightning has better range, but terrible performance above 20,000 feet. Its turbochargers freeze, its engines lose power. German fighters exploit this weakness ruthlessly. Then there's the tactical doctrine itself. Even when American fighters can reach the target, they're required to fly in close formation with the bombers. The regulation reads, "Fighter escorts will maintain visual contact with protected assets at all times. Pursuit of enemy aircraft beyond 5 miles from the bomber stream is prohibited." The logic seems sound. Bomber crews need to see their escorts. Psychological reassurance matters. If fighters disappear chasing German interceptors, panic spreads through the formations. But this defensive posture hands the initiative to the Luftwaffe. German fighters choose when to attack. They choose the altitude. They assemble their formations unmolested, then strike the bombers at optimal angles while American fighters scramble reactively, always responding, never dictating. Lieutenant Colonel Hub Zemke, commander of the 56th Fighter Group, describes the frustration in his after-action reports. "We watch German formations building up at 30,000 feet. We know they're going to dive on the bombers, but we're stuck at 25,000 feet in close escort. By the time they hit us, they've got speed and altitude advantage. We're climbing into their guns. The statistics reflect this tactical failure. Throughout 1943, the average 8th Air Force fighter pilot shoots down 0.9 German aircraft for every loss, less than 1 to 1. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe is destroying American bombers at rates that would end the war if sustained. During the summer of 1943, bomber loss rates average 6.1% per mission. A bomber crew needs to fly 25 missions to complete their tour. The math is brutal. Only 1 in 3 crews will survive. This is the strategic situation when the first P-51B Mustangs arrive in England in December 1943. Powered by the Packard-built Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the Mustang solves the range problem. With internal tanks and 2 drop tanks, combat radius extends to 750 miles. Berlin is reachable. Prague is reachable. Vienna is reachable. For the first time, American fighters can escort bombers anywhere in Europe. But range alone doesn't win air superiority. The tactical doctrine remains unchanged: close escort, visual contact, reactive defense, and the Luftwaffe is adapting faster than the Americans. By January 1944, German fighter units are receiving new directives from Luftflotte Reich headquarters. The instructions are specific and brutal. American bombers will no longer be attacked by individual fighters or small formations. All Jagdgeschwader will assemble into Gefechtsverband, battle formations consisting of 1 Sturmgruppe of heavily armed Focke-Wulf 190, as escorted by 2 Begleitgruppen of Messerschmitt 109s. The Sturmgruppe will approach from astern at bomber altitude. Escort fighters will engage American fighters at higher altitude. The Sturmbock aircraft will press attacks to less than 100 meters regardless of return fire. This is the culmination of 18 months of hard-won experience. The Germans have figured out what works. The Fu-190A8, modified for Sturmbock duty, carries 530mm Mk108 cannons and extra armor plating protecting the pilot and engine. The 30mm rounds are devastating. A single hit can sever a B-17's wing. 2 hits will knock an engine completely off its mount. 3 hits will break a bomber's fuselage in half. But the additional armor and firepower have a cost. The Sturmbock Furview 190 is slow to maneuver, vulnerable to American fighters in a turning engagement, so the Germans protect them with Bf-109Gs, optimized for high-altitude dogfighting. The 109s position themselves between the Sturmbock aircraft and the American escorts, creating a defensive screen. When the Sturmbock formation reaches attack position, they come in line astern, 8 aircraft abreast, and simply fly through the bomber formation, firing continuously. Luftwaffe ace Richard Franz, who flew Sturmbock missions with JG-3, later describes the tactic in a 1952 interview. We approached from slightly above, then dove opening fire with 13mm and 20mm guns to knock out the rear gunner. At about 150 meters we engaged with the Mk108. It was a formidable weapon. It could cut the wing off a B-17. The B-24 was weaker, easier to kill." End quote. When the Sturmbock tactic works, it's apocalyptic for bomber crews. On July 7, 1944, Sturmbock units destroy 14 B, 24 seconds in a single pass over Leipzig. On July 20th, 16 B-17 seconds go down, in flames over Magdeburg. The problem for American fighter pilots is positioning. By the time they see the Sturmbock formation, it's already attacking. The German escort fighters are above and behind the Mustangs, forcing them defensive. The Sturmbock aircraft are already among the bombers, too close for the escorts to engage without risking friendly fire. Everything about American doctrine is reactive. Wait for the attack, respond to the threat, defend the bombers. This defensive mindset permeates every level of command. Fighter group briefing rooms display signs reading, "The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive." Pilots who break formation to chase German fighters face official reprimands. Squadron commanders who allow their pilots to range ahead of the bomber stream risk relief from command. Then, in January 1944, 2 things change simultaneously. First, Lieutenant General Jimmy Doolittle assumes command of the 8th Air Force, former test pilot, Tokyo raid leader, a fighter pilot's general. Second, Doolittle visits his fighter command headquarters at RAF Debden and sees that sign. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to bring the bombers back alive. He tells his subordinate commander, Major General William Kepner, to take it down. Replace it with new words. The first duty of 8th Air Force fighters is to destroy German fighters. Not protect, destroy, not defend, attack. The sign goes up the next day. But signs don't kill German fighters, tactics do. And the fundamental tactical problem remains unsolved. How do you stop a Sturmbok formation before it reaches the bombers? The answer emerges not from headquarters but from squadron-level pilots who've been fighting the Luftwaffe for months and understand what the Germans are doing. Captain Don Blakeslee, commanding officer of the 4th Fighter Group, begins positioning his flights 5,000 feet below bomber altitude during escort missions in late January. When asked why by group operations officers, his explanation is direct. The Germans are building up their formations low. We can see them from above, but we can't engage because doctrine says, stay with the bombers. By the time they climb to attack altitude, they've got energy, and we're defensive. If we position below the bombers, we can see the Germans forming up, and we can bounce them before they climb. This is heretical. Every tactical manual says fighters need altitude advantage, energy advantage, the ability to dive on threats from above. Blakeslee is proposing the opposite. Surrender the altitude, position below the bombers. Trade the high ground for better visual reconnaissance and the ability to intercept German formations during their vulnerable climb phase. Fighter Command initially rejects this. Too dangerous, too unconventional. But Doolittle intervenes. He tells Kepner, direct quote, "If the tactic helps destroy German fighters, authorize it. We're not in the bomber protection business anymore. We're in the Luftwaffe destruction business." End quote. On February 4, 1944, the 4th Fighter Group receives permission to test below-altitude escort during a mission to Frankfurt. Blakeslee positions his 48 Mustangs in a loose patrol pattern 3,000 feet below the bomber stream. Instead of rigid formation flying, his flights spread out laterally, creating a screen 15 miles wide. Each flight leader watches a different sector of sky. 20 minutes from the target, Lieutenant Jim Goodson spots German fighters assembling at 18,000 feet, 7,000 feet below the bombers, but 3,000 feet above the American escorts. Standard Gefechtsverband formation, 60-plus aircraft. The German fighters are focused upward, watching the bomber stream, waiting for the right moment to begin their climb. They're not watching below. Goodson's flight of 4 Mustangs attacks the formation from there, 6 o'clock low. No warning. No chance to react. The Germans scatter. Their careful assembly breaks apart. By the time they reform, the bombers have passed. The attack never happens. More importantly, the Mustangs destroy 5 10-4-190s and 3 Bf 10-409s without losing a single aircraft. The ratio is 8-0. Doolittle reads the after-action report and authorizes below-altitude tactics for all fighter groups. But authorization and implementation are different things. Many squadron commanders resist. Fighter pilots train their entire careers to maintain altitude advantage. The idea of deliberately positioning below a threat violates fundamental fighter doctrine, going back to World War I. Dive on the enemy. Never let them dive on you. Energy equals life. Altitude equals energy. This is gospel. Blakeslee's response is pragmatic. Altitude advantage matters in a dogfight. But this isn't a dogfight. This is an interception. We're not maneuvering against the Germans. We're bouncing them while they're climbing and watching something else. They're doing the hard work of gaining altitude. We just need to be where they don't expect us. The physics support his argument. A Bf 109, climbing from 18,000 feet to 25,000 feet at maximum rate, covers about 7,000 vertical feet in 3 minutes. During that climb, the aircraft's airspeed drops to 180 knots. The pilot is focused on maintaining formation position, managing engine temperature, watching the bomber stream above. His scan pattern doesn't include checking 6 o'clock low because no American fighter should be there. But if a P-51 is positioned at 22,000 feet, 3,000 below the bombers, and begins a shallow dive when the Bf-109 starts its climb, the Mustang reaches attack position in 90 seconds. The closure rate is overwhelming. The P-51 is accelerating downward. The Bf-109 is decelerating upward. When Goodson fires, he's doing 380 knots. His target is doing 180. The German pilot doesn't see the tracers until impacts start walking up his fuselage. February 20th, 1944. Big week begins. The largest coordinated bombing offensive against German industry ever attempted. 1,000 bombers per day for 6 consecutive days. Every Mustang group in England is airborne, and for the first time, they're all using below-altitude tactics. Blakeslee's 4th Fighter Group positions at 28,000 feet, 4,000 below the bomber stream. The 56th Fighter Group under Hub Zemke stations at 26,000, 6,000 below. The newly arrived 357th Fighter Group, still learning the aircraft, stays closer at 29,000. The tactical geometry is deliberate. Multiple altitudes, overlapping zones, wide lateral spacing. The goal is continuous visual coverage of the airspace below the bombers where German formations assemble. Day 1. Target: Leipzig. The Luftwaffe responds with everything available. 260 fighters, the largest German formation since Schweinfurt, but they're not coordinated, different groups launching from different airfields. Some formations climbing early, others waiting, and the American Mustangs are positioned perfectly to exploit this disorganization. The German fighters appear on radar 20 minutes before the target. Ground controllers vector the Mustang groups toward the assembly points. Instead of waiting for the Germans to attack, the Americans intercept them while they're still forming up. The first engagements occur at 19,000 feet, 6,000 below the bombers. The Germans are still climbing, still assembling, not yet in attack formation. The mathematics are brutal and undeniable. Before Big Week, before below-altitude tactics, the 8th Air Force lost 4 bombers for every German fighter destroyed. Now they're destroying 3 German fighters for every bomber lost. This isn't a marginal improvement, it's a complete inversion of the strategic equation. And it's accelerating. March 8, 1944. Second Berlin Raid. The Luftwaffe launches 280 fighters. They try a new tactic. Split altitude assembly. Half the formation at 16,000 feet. Half at 28,000. The theory is that American fighters positioned below the bombers will intercept the low group, allowing the high group to attack unmolested. The tactic fails within minutes. The Mustang groups don't cluster at a single altitude anymore. They patrol in staggered layers, some flights at 20,000 feet, others at 24,000, others at 27,000. When the German low group climbs from 16,000, American fighters positioned at 20,000 intercept them. When the German high group descends from 28,000, American fighters positioned at 27,000 are waiting. The 56th Fighter Group, positioned at multiple altitudes along the bomber route, engages both German formations simultaneously. Different flights, different altitudes, coordinated attacks. The German fighters never reach the bombers. 23 Luftwaffe aircraft destroyed. 2 Mustangs lost, both to mechanical failure, not combat. General Adolf Galland, inspector of fighters for the Luftwaffe, writes in his diary, "The Americans have learned to position where we must pass them to attack the bombers. We cannot avoid engagement. We cannot surprise them. We cannot mass our forces without interception. The tactical situation has become untenable." He's describing the core insight of below-altitude escort tactics. The bombers act as bait, predictable targets flying straight courses at known altitudes. German fighters must climb to reach them. That climb phase becomes a killing zone. The Mustangs patrol that zone, watching for any German formation attempting to climb through it. When they spot targets, they bounce them with every advantage: speed, position, surprise, and initiative. March 9th. Third Berlin Raid. The Luftwaffe doesn't launch. Weather is perfect. Visibility unlimited. 900 bombers cross into German airspace. The fighter command posts track them on radar. And they don't scramble, they don't engage. They surrender Berlin unopposed. This is the moment the Luftwaffe breaks. Not destroyed, not defeated in a single climactic battle. They simply stop fighting, because fighting has become mathematically impossible. Every engagement costs more fighters than they can afford to lose. The replacement pilots arriving from training schools have 40 hours in aircraft. The American pilots they face have 200 hours and 50 combat missions. Experience gap compounds into kill ratio, compounds into strategic collapse. April 8, 1944. The pattern continues. American bombers strike Brunswick. The Luftwaffe launches 80 fighters. The Mustangs destroy 33. The Germans shoot down 8 bombers. Exchange ratio, 4-1 in favor of the Americans. April 10th. Bombers hit railroad marshalling yards near Paris. Luftwaffe launches 45 fighters. Mustangs destroy 17. The Germans shoot down 5 bombers. Exchange ratio, 3-1. April 24th. Bombers strike Friedrichshafen. Luftwaffe launches 70 fighters. Mustangs destroy 29. Germans shoot down 9 bombers. Exchange ratio, 3-1. The numbers become monotonous in their consistency. Every engagement produces the same result. The Germans lose more fighters than they destroy bombers. The Americans lose fewer escorts than the bombers being protected. The tactical geometry remains unchanged. Mustangs positioned below bomber altitude, intercepting German formations during their vulnerable climb phase. But below altitude positioning alone doesn't explain the complete dominance. The tactic works because of 3 compounding advantages that German fighter pilots cannot counter. First, visual acquisition. The Mustang pilots positioned below the bomber stream can see German formations assembling against the sky. The Germans, climbing toward the bombers, must look upward into glare and haze. The P-51 pilots are looking downward against contrails and ground contrast. Every German formation shows up clearly. Every movement is visible. The Americans have complete situational awareness. The Germans have partial awareness at best. Lieutenant Urban Drew of the 351st Fighter Group describes this advantage in his mission reports. Quote, "We patrol at 24,000. The bomber stream is at 30,000. We're watching the sky below us and we see everything. The Germans form up and start climbing, and we see them 5 minutes before they see us. Sometimes we're already accelerating in our dive before they know we're there. It's not a fair fight. It's an ambush every time." End quote. Second advantage. Energy management. When a Mustang positioned at 24,000 feet begins a shallow dive to intercept a German formation climbing from 20,000, the P-51 accelerates to 400 knots within 30 seconds. The Bf-109 climbing at maximum rate is doing 180 knots. The closure rate is 220 knots, more than 370 feet per second. At that speed differential, the engagement window is measured in seconds. The German pilot sees tracers and then feels impacts almost simultaneously. The Mustang pilot controls the engagement completely. If the German tries braking, the P-51 can follow through the turn because it has speed to burn. If the German tries diving away, the P-51 is already diving faster. The only escape is to reverse course immediately and dive toward the ground. But that means abandoning the mission, abandoning the other fighters in your formation, and accepting that you cannot climb back to attack the bombers without getting intercepted again. Third advantage. Formation disruption. The Sturmbock tactic requires tight formations. 8 aircraft abreast, multiple rows, everyone maintaining position. When Mustangs attack during the climb phase, they don't need to destroy every German fighter. They just need to break the formation, force the Germans to maneuver defensively, make them jettison their drop tanks, destroy 1 or 2 aircraft and the others scatter to avoid colliding with debris. Once scattered, the German formation cannot reform quickly enough to execute coordinated attacks. Some fighters climb, others dive, others try holding position. The carefully rehearsed choreography falls apart. By the time they sort themselves out, The bombers have passed. The attack window is gone. The Germans must land, refuel, rearm, and try again. If they have enough fuel remaining, if their bases haven't been strafed by other Mustang groups, if morale hasn't completely collapsed, Captain Don Gentile of the 4th Fighter Group becomes the face of this new tactical dominance. Between March 8th and April 8th, 1944, he shoots down 14 German fighters. Every kill occurs below bomber altitude. Every engagement begins with Gentile's flight positioned low, watching German formations attempt to climb toward American bombers. The pattern is identical across all 14 victories. Spot German formation assembling, estimate their climb rate and attack vector, position to intercept, wait for the Germans to climb through the intercept point, attack with speed and altitude advantage, break the formation before it reaches the bombers. Gentile's gun camera footage shows the same scenario repeatedly. German fighters in climbing formation, focused upward, no defensive maneuvering, easy deflection shooting. Then impacts. Then fire. Then one fewer German fighter climbing toward American bombers. The Life magazine profile published in April 1944 describes Gentile as the Luftwaffe's worst nightmare. But he's not exceptional. He's representative. Hundreds of American fighter pilots are achieving similar results using identical tactics. The below-altitude positioning converts average pilots into efficient killers. You don't need exceptional gunnery skills when you're shooting at targets that don't see you coming. You don't need advanced dogfighting skills when you control the engagement parameters completely. Major George Preddy of the 352nd Fighter Group destroys 26 German fighters between March and August 1944 using below-altitude tactics. Lieutenant Colonel John Meyer of the same group gets 24. Captain Ray Wetmore of the 359th Fighter Group gets 21. These aren't naturally gifted aces with supernatural reflexes. They're professionally trained pilots executing sound tactical doctrine against opponents trapped in an impossible situation. The Luftwaffe tries desperate counter-tactics. In May 1944, several Jagdgeschwader begin launching pairs of fighters ahead of the main formation. Scouts. Their mission is to climb to 35,000 feet and look for American fighters positioned below the bomber stream. If they spot Mustangs, they radio altitude and position to the main formation. The main formation then adjusts their climb to avoid the intercept zone. This works occasionally, but it costs the Luftwaffe their highest-performing aircraft and most experienced pilots for reconnaissance work. The scouts must climb to extreme altitude, burning fuel and time, while the bomber stream continues eastward. By the time the scouts spot the American fighters and relay information, the geometry has changed. The bombers have moved. The Mustangs have moved. The German formation must adjust on the fly, and the scouts themselves become targets for American fighters positioned at 35,000 feet who intercept them exactly the way Mustangs intercept everyone else. June 6, 1944. D-Day. The invasion of Normandy. American bombers and fighters fly thousands of sorties, providing air support for ground forces. The Luftwaffe launches fewer than 100 sorties total, not because they lack aircraft. German factories produced 2,000 fighters in May, but because the pilot training pipeline is shattered, the experienced formation leaders are dead. The replacement pilots last 3 missions on average before being killed or captured. The exchange ratios tell the story. In the first 2 weeks of June, American fighters destroy 130 Luftwaffe aircraft. American losses, 18 fighters. Ratio, 7-1. This is the final form of air superiority. The Germans can build fighters but cannot build pilots fast enough to replace losses. Every mission bleeds experience that cannot be recovered. July 7, 1944. Luftwaffe headquarters attempts the largest coordinated operation since Big Week, Operation Sturmjäger. 4 Sturmbok groups totaling 160 F-190A8s, 8 escort groups totaling 240 Bf-109s, 400 aircraft, the largest German fighter formation assembled since 1943. The target, B, 24 liberators, bombing oil refineries near Leipzig. The Americans detect the formation building up on radar while it's still assembling over German airfields. 8 Mustang groups, totaling 290 aircraft, position themselves along the projected intercept route. Not above the bombers, below them. Altitude, 23,000 feet. The bomber stream is flying at 28,000. The German formation climbs from their assembly point at 18,000 feet. They're following textbook Gefechtsverband doctrine. Sturmbock aircraft in the center, Bf-109 escorts in layers above and behind. They're climbing at 300 feet per minute toward the bomber stream. Every pilot is focused upward, watching for the American escorts they expect to see flying close formation with the bombers. The Mustangs hit them at 22,000 feet, not from above, from level and slightly below. The German formation is still climbing, still accelerating, still trying to reach attack altitude. The American fighters have speed and surprise. The first pass destroys 18 German aircraft in 90 seconds. The Gefechtsverband disintegrates. Some fighters try continuing the climb, others try diving away. The tight formation, essential for Sturmbock tactics, scatters across 30 miles of sky. The American bombers, protected by this chaos, complete their bombing run without harassment. Every bomb lands within the target area. The oil refineries burn. Meanwhile, below the bomber stream, the Mustangs are methodically destroying what's left of Operation Sturmjäger. The heavily armored Furv 190A8s, designed to kill bombers, are helpless against fighters attacking from positions they never expected to defend. The 30mm cannons that could destroy a B-17 with 3 hits are useless when the target is a P-51, doing 400 knots with a 5-second firing window. The final tally: 67 German fighters confirmed destroyed, another 30 probably destroyed. American losses: 11 Mustangs, 3 to mid-air collisions, 8 to combat. The ratio is 8-1. This is the number that matters, not individual pilot skill, not aircraft performance, system versus system. The American tactical system produces 8 dead German fighters for every dead American fighter. The German tactical system produces 1 dead American fighter for every 8 dead German fighters. General Adolf Galland reviews the casualty reports from Operation Sturmjäger and writes to Reichsmarschall Göring, "We cannot continue operations under current conditions. The Americans position their fighters where our doctrine requires us to pass them. We have no counter-tactic. I request immediate cessation of daylight intercept missions until we develop new tactical approaches." Göring denies the request. The bombers must be stopped, attack anyway, use different tactics, try harder, have more courage. The operational directive that goes out to Jagdgeschwader commanders on July 10th reads, "All fighter units will engage American bomber formations, regardless of escort presence. Casualties are acceptable. Failure to engage is not." It's a death sentence phrased as orders. The Luftwaffe continues launching intercept missions because commanders order them to, not because the missions have any chance of success. And the casualty rates reflect this. July 1944, 203 German fighters destroyed. August, 237 destroyed. September, 189 destroyed. The numbers represent experienced pilots who cannot be replaced. Some have 50 missions, some have 200, all dead. By October 1944, the average Luftwaffe fighter pilot has 17 hours in aircraft and 0 combat missions when he flies his first operational sortie. The average American fighter pilot has 300 hours and 40 missions. When these two groups meet in combat, the outcome is predetermined. The German climbs toward the bomber stream following whatever doctrine he learned in abbreviated training. The American positions below the bomber stream, following doctrine refined through 80 combat missions and 200 dead Germans who made the same mistakes. The engagement lasts 20 seconds. Gun camera footage shows a Bf-109 in climbing formation, tracers walking up the fuselage, impacts on the cockpit, smoke, fire, aircraft spinning, another pilot gone. Another replacement needed. Another training class rushed through abbreviated curriculum. another inexperienced pilot sent to die against Americans who've mastered the tactical geometry of below-altitude positioning. The statistical analysis compiled by 8th Air Force Intelligence in November 1944 quantifies the dominance. From February through October, P-51 Mustangs destroyed 1,638 German fighters in air-to-air combat. American fighter losses, 173. Overall exchange ratio, 9.5 to 1. When analyzing only those engagements where Mustangs employed below-altitude positioning, the ratio climbs to 12 to 1. These numbers aren't estimates, they're compiled from gun camera footage, aircraft wreckage analysis, and German loss records captured after the war. The below-altitude escort tactic, initially considered heretical by traditional fighter doctrine advocates, becomes the most effective air combat innovation of World War II. Not because it gives American pilots better aircraft. The Mustang is excellent but not invincible. Bf-109s can match it in some performance parameters. FIRV 190s exceed it in roll rate and low-altitude speed. The dominance comes from positioning. The Americans are where the Germans must pass to attack bombers. The Mustangs see every German formation assembling. They intercept during the climb phase when the Germans are vulnerable, focused elsewhere, unable to maneuver effectively. The tactical geometry creates a permanent advantage that German pilots cannot counter without abandoning their primary mission of stopping the bombers. December 1944. The Luftwaffe attempts one final massive operation, Operation Bodenplatte. But the target isn't bombers, it's Allied airfields. If German fighters cannot stop American bombers, maybe they can destroy American fighters on the ground. The operation launches on January 1, 1945. 900 German fighters. Targets: 11 Allied airfields in France, Belgium, and Holland. The raid achieves tactical surprise. Many Allied aircraft are destroyed on the places, ground. But the Luftwaffe losses are catastrophic. 214 fighters destroyed, 143 pilots killed. The experienced formation leaders who survived Big Week, survived the summer of '44, survived the tactical dominance of below-altitude Mustangs. They die strafing airfields protected by anti-aircraft guns. It's the final death gasp of the Jagdwaffe as an effective fighting force. After Bodenplatte, the Luftwaffe ceases to exist as a strategic factor. Individual aces continue flying, small groups mount sporadic intercepts, but organized resistance ends. American bombers roam German airspace at will. The P-51 Mustangs that once patrolled below bomber altitude, looking for climbing German formations, now fly ahead of the bomber stream looking for targets of opportunity on the ground. The tactical doctrine evolves because the opposition collapsed, but the legacy of below-altitude positioning extends beyond World War II. Post-war tactical analysis by both American and German air forces identifies the concept as revolutionary. Traditional fighter doctrine emphasized altitude advantage. Height equals energy equals survivability. This remained gospel from World War I through early World War II. Dive on the enemy. Never let them dive on you. Control the high ground. Below-altitude escort inverted this, by recognizing that altitude advantage matters less than positional advantage relative to enemy objectives. If the enemy must climb to reach a target, position where they must pass you during that climb, trade the high ground for better situational awareness, and intercept geometry. Let the enemy do the work of climbing while you watch and wait for the optimal strike moment. Korean warfighter pilots employ similar concepts. When escorting B-29 seconds against MiG-15 attacks, F-86 Sabres position below bomber altitude, along likely intercept vectors. The MiGs must climb to reach the bombers. The Sabres intercept them during the climb. The tactical geometry mirrors World War II exactly. Vietnam-era F-4 Phantom crews use the same positioning when escorting strike packages against North Vietnamese fighters. Modern air combat doctrine still emphasizes positioning relative to threat vectors rather than absolute altitude advantage. The final statistics compiled by the United States Strategic Air Forces in Europe tell the story with mathematical precision. From January through December 1944, P-51 Mustangs destroyed 4,950 enemy aircraft. American losses: 2,520 aircraft, including all causes: combat, accidents, mechanical failure, weather, everything. When isolating only air-to-air combat and only missions employing below-altitude positioning tactics, the ratio exceeds 10-1. For every Mustang shot down by a German fighter, 10 German fighters were destroyed by Mustangs. This isn't marginal superiority, this is total dominance. This is the difference between a tactical system optimized for the actual combat environment versus a tactical system based on theoretical doctrine that fails when tested by reality. The Luftwaffe entered 1944 with experienced pilots, effective aircraft, and sound tactical doctrine for attacking bombers. They lost because they couldn't adapt when the Americans changed the rules. The Sturmbock tactic required time and space to assemble formations. The Americans denied both by positioning where the Germans must assemble. The Gefechtsverband required defensive escort fighters to protect the bomber killers. The Americans attacked during the climb phase before the escorts could establish protective screens. Every German attempt to adapt failed because every adaptation required passing through the altitude band where American fighters were positioned. Try assembling lower. The Mustangs intercept you lower. Try assembling higher. The Mustangs reposition higher. Try assembling faster with smaller formations. You lack the mass to penetrate bomber defensive fire. Try not assembling at all and attacking individually. You get picked off by fighters who see you coming from 20 miles away. The tactical trap was inescapable, and it was all enabled by one simple doctrinal change. Position fighters below bomber altitude instead of above it. Sacrifice theoretical altitude advantage for practical positional advantage. Watch the assembly zones instead of watching the bombers. Kill the Germans while they're climbing instead of after they've attacked. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now, and don't forget to subscribe.